Hello everybody, Beard Reads Books here, and welcome to today's book review video. In this video I'll be reviewing this book, Killing for Company, The Case of Dennis Nilsen, written by Brian Masters. Brian Masters, he wrote this book. It's a kind of a biography, for what a better way of putting it, on mass murderer Dennis Nilsen. So Brian Masters, I had a lot of contact with Dennis, corresponded with him quite a lot, sort of met up with him in prison and all the rest. For those of you that don't know Dennis Nilsen, he was a Scotsman who, over a short period of time, I think like the late 70s, early 80s, killed about 12-15 people, and it's quite gruesome in a way, because he killed and he wasn't an necrophiliac as such, but he did sort of things with the bodies and all the rest. It was very hard reading that section of the book, sort of where Brian Masters was relating what Dennis Nilsen did with the bodies. Not just the slightly sexual element, but also the way Dennis Nilsen disposed of the bodies as well. It's very hard reading. As you can probably see from the sticker, that little bit there, there was recently, I think it was back in 2018, there was an ITV drama, and David Tennant, he played Dennis Nilsen, and that's what made me become aware initially of the whole story, like Dennis Nilsen. That's quite a good drama, that was. David Tennant did a very good job of playing Dennis Nilsen. So my wife and I watched that drama, and it got me interested in it, because we love watching that kind of program, and that it's fascinating in a very, very morbid kind of way. But then, when having watched that, when I then saw this for sale in a bookshop, I thought, I want to buy it and actually read it. And one thing I quite like about this book is Brian Masters. He does a very good job, I think, of being pretty neutral in the way he recounts the whole story. You know, he doesn't like, what's the best way of putting it? He doesn't condemn Dennis Nilsen. He doesn't paint him in a good light or a bad light. Brian Masters, he pretty much concentrates on sort of relaying just the facts. You know, he keeps pretty much to the facts without he doesn't go into putting any of his own emotions behind it into what he's writing, if that makes sense. He does keep a pretty neutral tone throughout the story, and he does a good job relating Dennis Nilsen's upbringing. It was quite interesting reading about his past and all the rest, how he grew up in his upbringing in Scotland, and does a pretty good job, I thought, of sort of recounting Dennis's character and all the rest. Yeah, and it was kind of insightful, I found, this book, sort of reading about the whole case and all the rest. Like I said, in the chapter where it's talking about the victims and sort of what Dennis did and all the rest, that bit is a very, very, very hard read. Very hard read. I mean, some of the things that Dennis did with the bodies, it's I almost had to skip that chapter. It's like, yeah. So, but like I said, it was a very compelling read in a highly morbid way, but was interesting. It was very interesting. And one thing that stood out for me, well, there are two things that stood out. One of the things that stood out was how, and it also stood out in the ITV drama, was the fact that when Dennis was finally caught by the police, he was very open about what he did, and he was, the police, they didn't really have to question him as such. He just spewed out information. He was just freely offering information. He was just talking and talking and talking, and the police are, they didn't have to question him. They didn't have to sort of probe for information. They didn't have to force the information out of him. He was just freely giving it, sort of, very like 19 to the dozen kind of talking, and just sort of offloading everything he'd done onto them, and just freely telling the police and that. And I mean, but one thing that really stood out to me was when people like found out about how Dennis had gone about sort of disposing of the bodies, and that he'd basically like cut the bodies up and boiled them down and flushed them down the toilet and burnt the bodies to like hide it and all the rest. A lot of people, they'd like expressed absolute revulsion, disgust, distaste at the way in which Dennis had disposed of the bodies, and it was Dennis's reaction when Dennis found out how people are reacting to the way he disposed of his body. Dennis's reaction to that really stood out, because his reaction was pretty much the case of, why are people getting so like revolted and disgusted at the way I disposed of the bodies? Surely they should be getting revolted and disgusted at the fact that I murdered the people in the first place. And it highlighted for me the fact that Dennis was looking at it in a very logical way. I mean, to hear that somebody's like butchered a body and like boiled it down and flushed it down the toilet and burnt it to get rid of it, that is a pretty disgusting thing. And I suppose that's a very emotional response, to think that the body's not kind of a proper burial, the fact that it's like you've done that to the body and like boiled it down and all the rest, is to show like revulsion at that, a very natural reaction, but I suppose it's an emotional reaction as well. But Dennis, he was looking at it in a very logical way, so I suppose an emotionless way. He was like, well, I had a dead body and it needed to be disposed of, and I just disposed of it in a logical way, and it's just a body, and why are people getting revolted at the way I disposed of a body? Surely they should be revolted at the fact that I committed the murder. Surely the murder itself is more revolting and disgusting than the disposal of the body, so I mean, that kind of struck me, the fact that his logical response to people's emotional response to the way he disposed of the body. So I mean, that's one thing that really sort of stood out for me, sort of reading through this book. Now, I mean, I've read quite a few sort of different books written on about sort of murderers. If you bear with me, guys, what I'm going to do is, for example, this is another book I've got that I read a long time ago on Fred and Rosemary Rast. A couple of killers from like Gloucester. They got like arrested in the 90s. So I've read a few different books about sort of like murderers and that. And this one is probably one of the better books I've I've read on a murderer. It was very captivating, you know, and it very gripping. So if you're the kind of person who enjoy like reading books on murderers and that kind of thing, I would definitely recommend this one. It is a very interesting book to read. Like I said, there's one chapter on the victims. If I just look through, where is it? Oh, get to the right page, Davy boy. Yeah, sort of like there's a couple of chapters. Chapter 6 on the victims, and chapter 7 on the disposal of the victims. Very hard going, very, very hard to sort of get through those 2 chapters. You know, it is it's exceedingly morbid, you know, so it's, yeah, you need to have a bit of a strong stomach for that, but definitely recommend this book, guys. This is one of the better books I've read on murderers. So if you're into that kind of book, into that kind of reading, this is definitely a book you've got to have on your bookshelves. Highly recommend this one, guys. Yeah. So after reading this, I think I'm going to go for something nice and light and simple, something completely different to this. Have a nice break. And anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the review and look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.